That lake was not just water and shoreline to me. It was 12 years of sunrises, fishing trips, and quiet moments that kept me sane through life's hardest chapters. I purchased my home specifically because of the lake access. The realtor had walked me down that gentle slope through the shared utility easement, pointing out how the trail connected to the community lot. "This is all part of the package," she had said. "Direct lake access whenever you want it." I signed the papers that very afternoon. Every weekend morning, I would walk that trail before the neighborhood stirred. Just me, the rising sun, and the gentle lapping of water against the shore. I memorized every root and rock along that path. When my daughter Emma was old enough to walk steadily, she joined me, her small hand in mine as we made our way down to feed the ducks that gathered by the fallen log near the water's edge. During the hardest year of my life, when my wife Janet was fighting cancer, that lake became my refuge. Janet would sit on the bench I built while I fished nearby, both of us pretending things were normal for just a few precious hours. After she passed, I scattered some of her ashes there with permission from the original HOA board. That was before everything changed. The lake witnessed all of it. When work stress threatened to overwhelm me, I would drag my kayak down that trail and paddle until my arms ached and my mind cleared. When Emma had her heart broken at 16, we sat at the water's edge skipping stones until she could smile again. That lake was not a luxury. It was a lifeline. For nearly a decade, things were peaceful. The original HOA board was reasonable, mostly older residents who valued community over control. I even served as secretary for 2 years, helping organize the annual barbecue by the lake. We maintained the common areas together, and I personally kept that trail clear of debris after every storm. Then came the election 3 months ago. A group of newer homeowners formed a voting bloc, promising modernization and enhanced property values. Gregory Whitman, who had moved in just 18 months prior, became the new HOA president. His campaign promised beautification projects and security upgrades. Most of us did not pay much attention. HOA politics seemed trivial compared to real-life concerns. The first sign of trouble came in the mail. A formal notice with the new HOA letterhead announced comprehensive review of shared areas and upcoming access modifications to ensure proper utilization of community resources. The language was deliberately vague, filled with bureaucratic terms that masked the true intentions. I skimmed it and tossed it aside, assuming it meant new flowers or perhaps better lighting along the main pathways. I was wrong. That Tuesday, I returned home after a 10-hour shift, my fishing rod already prepared in the trunk. All I wanted was an hour of peace by the water before sunset. I parked in my driveway, changed into comfortable clothes, and headed toward my familiar path. I stopped dead in my tracks at what I saw. A tall black metal fence stretched across the entire entrance to the lake trail. 6 feet high with pointed finials at the top, it blocked the path completely. In the center stood a gate with a heavy-duty padlock dangling from the latch. A new sign, laminated and official-looking, read, "HOA members only, no trespassing, access by approved permit only." I stood frozen, staring at this barrier that had appeared from nowhere. My mind could not process what I was seeing. The path I had walked thousands of times was now blocked. The lake that had held me together through my darkest days was suddenly off-limits. I approached the fence and gripped the cold metal bars. Through them, I could see my bench in the distance. I could see the water that had become part of me, but I could not reach it. That was the moment I realized what was happening. This was not about security or beautification. This was about control. They had taken something deeply personal and made it political. My sanctuary was now behind enemy lines. And that was their first mistake. The next morning, I called the number listed on the HOA notice. After being transferred twice, I finally reached Marjorie, the new board secretary. Her voice was professionally detached as she explained that the lake access was now limited to approved community use only, and that I would need to submit a formal application for lake privileges. "Privileges?" I said, my voice rising despite my effort to remain calm. "I have been using that path for 12 years. I helped build the bench down there. I have maintained that trail after every storm." "I understand your frustration, Mr. Davis," she replied with practiced patience. But the board has determined that unrestricted access has led to maintenance issues and security concerns. The new policy ensures proper oversight. I requested an emergency meeting with the board. 3 days later, I sat across from them in the community center conference room. 5 people in business casual attire looked back at me with expressions ranging from boredom to mild annoyance. Gregory Whitman sat at the center, his tie knotted perfectly against his crisp white shirt. He was in his 40s, with the manicured appearance of someone who considered appearance equivalent to competence. "The board appreciates your passion for the lake area," Gregory said, steepling his fingers. "However, the decision to secure the access point was unanimous. We have documented instances of littering, unauthorized visitors, and potential liability issues." "I have never seen these problems," I countered, "and I am down there almost daily." "The area was always intended for controlled access," Gregory continued smoothly. "Past boards simply failed to enforce the existing bylaws correctly." I leaned forward. "That is not true. I served on the board myself years ago. There was never any restriction on resident access to the lake." Gregory's smile did not reach his eyes. "Perhaps you misunderstood the regulations at that time. Section 7, Paragraph 3 clearly states that common areas are subject to board oversight and restriction as necessary for community benefit." He slid a laminated copy of the bylaws toward me, a passage highlighted in yellow. The wording was vague enough to be interpreted either way, a deliberate ambiguity that now worked against me. "What about my bench?" I asked. "What about the memorial for my wife?" A flicker of something, perhaps genuine discomfort, crossed one board member's face, but Gregory remained unmoved. "Personal installations on community property were never officially permitted," he said, "though we have no immediate plans to remove existing structures." I left that meeting with nothing but a headache and a form to apply for scheduled lake access. 2 one-hour blocks per week, subject to approval, and a new $25 processing fee per application. Over the next few days, I spoke with other neighbors about the situation. Many expressed sympathy, but few were willing to challenge the board. "It is not worth the fight," said Tom from 3 doors down. "They can make your life miserable if you cross them." Lisa Jenkins, who had lived in the community even longer than I had, was more forthright. "This is ridiculous, Frank. That path has always been open to residents. But I cannot afford to get on their bad side right now. We are trying to get approval for a sunroom addition." The fear was palpable. This new board had created an atmosphere where compliance seemed easier than resistance. 1 week after the fence appeared, I submitted a formal complaint letter citing historical use, the lack of proper notice, and the absence of community input on such a significant change. I hand-delivered it to Marjorie's mailbox on a Sunday afternoon. 2 days later, I found a violation notice taped to my front door. The offense listed, "Unauthorized attempt to access restricted community property." Apparently, someone had reported seeing me inspect the gate mechanism with possible intent to circumvent security measures. The warning came with a $50 fine. From my kitchen window, I watched as landscapers arrived to plant decorative shrubs along the fence line. The message was clear. This change was permanent. Later that week, they reinforced the gate hinges and added a security camera pointed directly at the entrance. I stood at my window each evening, watching the sun set over water I could no longer reach. My fishing rod gathered dust in the garage. The kayak remained strapped to its storage rack. The path that had carried me through grief and joy was visible but unreachable. I was locked out of my own peace, and something inside me hardened into resolve. This was not about a lake anymore. This was about justice, about memory, about standing up when rules become weapons. I had lost Janet to cancer, something I could not fight. But this I could fight, and I would. If Gregory wanted to play with paperwork and regulations, I would learn the game better than he ever could. I took a week of vacation time from work and devoted it entirely to research. My dining table disappeared under stacks of documents, property maps, and legal pads filled with notes. First, I visited the county recorder's office. The clerk looked surprised when I requested the complete property records for our neighborhood going back 30 years. Research project, I explained with a smile that concealed my true purpose. For 3 days, I pored over plat maps, parcel divisions, and ownership transfers. The development had been built in phases, with the lake area designated as shared open space connected to residential lots via utility easements. But something caught my attention on the southeastern boundary, the exact location of my beloved trail. Lot 42 was a narrow strip that ran from the road down to the waterfront, including the path I had used for years. Unlike the main community parcels, this lot had a different ownership history. It had been sold by the original developer to a private investor named Callahan Properties in 1997, separate from the main development agreement. I traced its history further. Callahan Properties had held the land for years without development, eventually entering into a maintenance agreement with the HOA in 2008. But in 2019, Callahan had defaulted on property taxes. The lot had gone into foreclosure and had been held by Lakeside County ever since. My heart raced as I connected the dots. The HOA did not own the land where they had installed the fence. They were merely leasing it for maintenance purposes, a lease that had expired 6 months ago based on the dates in the system. I approached the clerk's desk again, trying to keep my voice casual. I notice Lot 42 is county-owned now. What typically happens with these orphan parcels? The clerk, an older woman named Dolers who had worked there for decades, adjusted her glasses. Usually they go to public auction if no one claims them. In fact, she clicked through her computer. That one is coming up next month, June 12th at the County Administration Building, minimum bid to cover back taxes. I thanked her and left with a bundle of photocopies, my mind already calculating the possibilities. The county tax auction was not widely publicized. Most parcels were oddities with little practical value. But this one? This small strip of land controlled lake access for an entire neighborhood. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing. I researched property auctions, tax certificates, and land rights. I spoke with a real estate attorney who confirmed my understanding. Whoever purchased the lot would control access rights, including the gate the HOA had installed on land they did not own. The morning of the auction, I dressed inconspicuously, jeans and a plain button-down shirt. No need to draw attention. I arrived early, taking a seat in the back of the small county meeting room. Only 8 other people were present, mostly developers and professional property flippers looking for bargains. Lot 42 came up third on the docket. Non-conforming parcel, 0.27 acres, waterfront access, minimum bid $4,200 to cover back taxes and fees. The auctioneer announced with the bored efficiency of someone who had done this thousands of times. One professional bidder raised his paddle half-heartedly. Another followed. The price inched up to $5,000. They clearly did not recognize the strategic value of this particular strip of land. I raised my paddle at $5,200. The first bidder countered with $5,500. I went to $6,000. He hesitated, looked at his paperwork, and shook his head. The other bidder had already lost interest. Going once at $6,000, going twice. The auctioneer's gavel fell. Sold to bidder number 17. My hands trembled slightly as I completed the paperwork and handed over a cashier's check. By lunchtime, I had the initial transfer documents in hand. The county would process the formal deed within 30 days, but the property was officially mine. All 0.27 acres of it, including the trail, the gate, and the only legal right to control access. That night, I stood at my kitchen window looking toward the lake. The fence was still there, the lock still in place. But now those barriers stood on my land. I held the preliminary ownership papers in my hand, feeling their weight, not just the paper, but the power they represented. Gregory and his board had chosen the wrong person to push around. They had fenced off my memories, thinking I would quietly accept their authority. Instead, they had triggered something unexpected: my determination. Now I had the only key that mattered, legal ownership, and I was about to use it. I waited until the deed was officially recorded. 34 days after the auction, the county assessor's office called to confirm that Lot 42 was now registered in my name. The official documents arrived by certified mail the following afternoon. I did not rush. Patience had gotten me this far. That evening I read through every word of the deed, the property description, and boundary details. I made 3 copies, one for my files, one for my glove compartment, and one that I would carry with me. Saturday morning dawned clear and cool. I woke early, made coffee, and gathered my fishing gear. I slipped the copy of the deed into my pocket along with something else, a new padlock with 2 keys. I walked down the street toward the gate as if it were any other day. No need for drama or confrontation, just a property owner accessing his land. When I reached the fence, I pulled out a small set of bolt cutters from my tackle box. The HOA's padlock fell away with one firm squeeze. I replaced it with my own lock, clicking it securely into place. Then I unlocked it with my key, opened the gate, and walked through. The familiar path welcomed me like an old friend. For the first time in months, I descended toward the water, feeling the slope beneath my feet and hearing the familiar crunch of gravel and pine needles. The lake glittered in the morning light. My bench was still there, weathered but intact. I set down my fishing gear and ran my hand along the worn wood. "I am back, Janet," I whispered. I fished for 2 peaceful hours before heading home. No confrontation, no audience, no statement, just reclaiming what was rightfully mine. The response came faster than I expected. As I walked back up the path around noon, Gregory's silver SUV screeched to a halt at the curb. He stormed toward me, face flushed with anger. "What do you think you are doing?" he demanded, pointing at the new padlock. "That is HOA property. You have damaged community installations and trespassed on restricted areas." I remained calm, enjoying the rare feeling of having solid ground beneath my arguments. "Good morning, Gregory. There seems to be some confusion about property boundaries." "There is no confusion. That gate and fence are HOA installations." His finger jabbed toward the lock. "Remove that immediately or face significant fines and possible legal action." I reached into my pocket and withdrew the folded deed. "This parcel, Lot 42, which includes this path and extends to the waterfront, belongs to me. I purchased it at county auction last month. The HOA lease expired in December." Gregory snatched the paper from my hand, scanning it with increasingly frantic eyes. This cannot be right. The board was never informed of any ownership change." "The county sent notices to the last known leaseholder," I said. "Perhaps you should check your mail more carefully. In any case, the HOA installed a fence on my property without permission. I have decided to leave it in place, but with my own lock." He handed the deed back, his expression shifting from anger to calculation. "This will not stand. The board will challenge this." "You are welcome to take it up with the county assessor," I replied, "or my attorney. In the meantime, this is private property, and I am asking you to leave." I watched as Gregory retreated to his vehicle, already on his phone. By that afternoon, texts from neighbors began trickling in. "Did you really buy the lake path? Is it true you outsmarted the board? Can I use your path to go fishing sometime?" I installed a small wooden sign beside my bench the next day. It read simply, "Private lot, respect the peace." Not to exclude anyone, but to establish boundaries, both physical and philosophical. That evening, Lisa Jenkins from down the street approached me as I sat on my front porch. "Frank, what you did." She glanced around to ensure no one was listening. "It is the first time someone has stood up to them. Thank you." I nodded, understanding the weight of her words. This was about more than a lake path now. It was about community, about fairness, about refusing to be bullied by those who confused rules with power. Gregory and his board had built a fence to keep me out. Now I held the only key, not out of spite but out of principle. The official HOA response arrived 3 days later in the form of a certified letter. Drafted on formal letterhead and signed by all 5 board members, it accused me of manipulative interference with community governance and unethical circumvention of established neighborhood standards. The letter demanded I sign over an access easement to the HOA immediately or face legal consequences. I placed the letter in a folder labeled HOA Correspondence and went about my day. Gregory was not accustomed to being ignored. The next board meeting was hastily rescheduled from its regular Tuesday to the following evening. Through the neighborhood grapevine, I learned they had declared an emergency session to address critical security breaches in common areas. I did not attend. Instead, I spent that evening installing solar-powered path lights along my lake trail, making it safer for evening visits. The board's next move came in the form of new emergency rules distributed to all homeowners. Rule 37. Non-board approved access to recreational water features through privately held land constitutes a community disturbance subject to fines. Rule 38. Residents may not grant access to community-adjacent features without proper documentation and board approval. They were creating rules specifically targeted at my legal property rights. Rules that had no binding power over my separate parcel, but could be used to intimidate others. Within days, small security cameras appeared on trees near the fence line, positioned to monitor who used my gate. On weekends, board members took turns parking nearby, noting who came and went. They even assigned volunteer community safety monitors to patrol the area during peak hours. The pressure tactics extended beyond surveillance. When Tom Jenkins stopped to chat with me by the lake one Saturday, he received a violation notice on Monday for unauthorized congregation in non-designated areas. The $75 fine was enough to ensure he avoided me the following weekend. Another neighbor, Maria Gomez, had her landscaping improvement request mysteriously delayed after she waved to me from the lake path. "They told me the committee needs more time to review standard bush trimming," she told me in a hushed voice at the grocery store. "Everyone knows it is because I used your trail." Through it all, I maintained my composure. I did not argue or escalate. I simply continued to use my property as I always had, fishing, kayaking, sitting on my bench as the sun set. Then came the final warning letter. This one threatened legal action for creating community discord and interfering with established governance procedures. It was accompanied by an invoice for $2,500 for removal and replacement of unauthorized lock on community security installation. That evening, I called Martin Schieffer, a land rights attorney recommended by a colleague. After reviewing my documents and the HOA's increasingly desperate letters, he chuckled. "They do not have a leg to stand on," Martin said, leaning back in his chair. "They installed a fence on property they did not own or lease. They are demanding access to land they have no rights to, and they are trying to fine you for using your own legally purchased property." "So what do we do?" I asked. "First, we send them a letter clearly establishing your ownership and rights. Then we give them the option to either remove their fence from your property or negotiate reasonable access terms." He smiled. "But honestly, they are bluffing. They know they have overstepped. They are just hoping you will back down before their mistakes become public." I left his office with a renewed sense of calm. The HOA had built their position on intimidation and vague regulations. Mine was built on county records and property law. The real battle, I realized, was not legal but social. Gregory and his board had created an atmosphere where neighbors feared each other and authority went unchallenged. That was about to change. Our neighborhood had a private Facebook group where residents shared local news, garage sale announcements, and lost pet notices. It had always been carefully neutral ground when it came to HOA politics. Until now. Sunday evening at 7:00 p.m., I made a simple post. No accusations, no anger, just facts. I shared a photo of my property deed, the county plat map showing Lot 42, and a brief timeline of events. I ended with a simple statement. "I purchased this land legally. I maintain it carefully. All respectful neighbors are welcome to use the lake path during daylight hours." The response was immediate and overwhelming. By morning, over 60 neighbors had commented, most expressing shock that the board had installed a fence on land they did not own, and many sharing their own stories of intimidation. "They fined me $100 for wind chimes last summer. Wind chimes," wrote a leaner from Oak Street. My shed paint was desert tan, not Sahara beige, and I got weekly violation notices until I repainted, added Michael from Lakeside Drive. The post had cracked open something previously contained. Collective frustration with rules that seemed arbitrary and enforcement that felt personal. Gregory attempted damage control, posting a lengthy explanation about community standards and property value protection. His post received only angry emoji reactions and demands for transparency. The regular monthly HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. Typically, these meetings drew the same 8 to 10 residents. This time, the community center room was packed with over 70 homeowners, many standing along the walls when the chairs filled. Gregory called the meeting to order with visible nervousness. "We have a full agenda tonight, so let us try to keep to scheduled topics," he began, attempting to control the narrative. Lisa Jenkins raised her hand immediately. "I move that we add discussion of the lake access issue to tonight's agenda. It seems many of us have questions." "I second that motion," called another voice from the back. Gregory had no choice but to acknowledge the motion, which passed with overwhelming support. For the next hour, residents questioned the board about the fence installation, the property ownership, and the heavy-handed enforcement tactics. Under pressure, Gregory finally admitted the critical truth. The board was aware the lease had expired, but assumed the county would renew automatically as in previous years. "So you built a fence on land you knew you might not have rights to?" asked Tom Jenkins, newfound courage in his voice. "We acted in what we believed were the community's best interests," Gregory replied, his professional veneer cracking. Another board member, Rachel Chen, unexpectedly spoke up. "I think we should acknowledge that mistakes were made in this process. Speaking personally, I was not fully informed about the property's status when I voted for the security measures." The meeting ended with unprecedented outcomes. 2 board members resigned on the spot, citing personal reasons. The remaining 3, including Gregory, agreed to form a committee with non-board residents to review all recent rule changes and enforcement actions. As I left the meeting, neighbors patted my shoulder and thanked me. Not because I had done anything extraordinary, but because I had simply stood firm when standing firm was necessary. A community petition began circulating the next day, calling for special elections to replace the entire board. It gathered 87 signatures in the first 24 hours. The fence that was meant to divide us had instead united us. Gregory's resignation letter came via email to all homeowners 2 weeks later. It cited hostile community environment and unappreciated efforts to maintain standards. He and his family put their house on the market the following month. The special election brought in 5 new board members, all longtime residents who remembered what the neighborhood was like before rules became more important than relationships. Lisa Jenkins became the new president, running on a platform of community first, regulations second. At the first meeting of the new board, they formally acknowledged my ownership of Lot 42 and proposed a collaborative approach. The HOA would maintain insurance coverage for the path area if I would allow resident access during daylight hours, a condition I had already established on my own. "We would like to propose installing better lighting along the path for safety," Lisa said. "With your permission, of course." "I think that would be wonderful," I replied. "And perhaps we could organize a community day to refresh the bench area. It could use some attention." The transformation was not just administrative. People began nodding to each other again while walking dogs or checking mail. The fear that had settled over the neighborhood like a fog began to lift. I kept my lock on the gate but made a simple change. I installed a combination lock box nearby with the gate key inside. The code was shared through the community newsletter. "For residents only," the notice read. "Please respect the space and close the gate behind you." Most people honored that trust. Those who did not quickly found themselves accountable to their neighbors rather than to an impersonal board. The following spring, we held the first community lake day in years. Families brought picnics, children fished from the shore, and several people tried kayaking for the first time. I brought extra life vests and fishing rods to share. At sunset, as people packed up to head home, Lisa approached me. "I do not think I ever properly thanked you," she said. "Not just for opening the lake access, but for reminding us all that community is not about rules. It is about people." I nodded, looking out at the water turning golden in the evening light. Janet always said that the best view of this lake was the one shared with friends. The next morning, I went down to the lake alone, as I had done hundreds of times before. The path felt different somehow, not just mine anymore, but ours in the best possible way. I sat on my bench, recently sanded and resealed during our community workday. Around my neck hung a small brass key on a leather cord, the original key to my lock on the gate. I kept it close not out of worry that someone would change the lock, but as a reminder. Some things are worth protecting. Some battles are worth fighting. And sometimes justice comes not from winning against your community, but from winning it back. The lake rippled gently in the morning breeze. A family of ducks paddled near the shore, the same family, perhaps, that Janet and I had fed years ago. I watched them glide effortlessly across the water, leaving gentle ripples that spread outward in perfect circles. Like the consequences of standing up for what matters, those ripples would continue long after the initial movement that caused them. The HOA had put up a fence to keep me from my lake. Instead, they had taught an entire neighborhood the power of having keys in their own pockets. Not keys to gates, but to something far more important: the courage to question authority when it overreaches, and the strength to protect the places and principles that matter most.